So, hi everyone, welcome to the Newburyport Literary Festival. We're sorry we're having some technical difficulties and we appreciate your patience. My name is Leslie Hendrickson. I'm on the steering committee of the festival, and as you may have heard us talking earlier, this is our 16th edition and our second year online. We of course hope to be back in person next year, but this format has allowed us to bring a lot of different authors to the festival, and we have more than 100 this year, which is our biggest festival ever. Just a couple things. We're using the webinar format, so you'll hear and see the panelists, but you won't see yourself, and hopefully you'll see Andre eventually. If you have comments, please use the chat box. Please feel free to tell us where you're from or if you're new to the festival.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from people. So if you want to both ask questions that I can keep track of and ask now and answer now or later, or just as we're talking and you want to comment on what we're saying or so on, please do so.
Great, but it's really helpful to put the questions in the Q&A tab instead of the chat tab, only because the chat, there's all these different comments, and in the Q&A we can keep the questions straight. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A tab for those. And you might have heard yesterday was Independent Bookstore Day, and we want to support our bookstore partners. Jabberwocky Bookshop, which is there's Andre again, which is a family affair for Erik, is one of our bookshop partners, as is the Bookshop of Beverly Farms. So I'll put the links for those bookshops in the chat. And of course, all of the books, including Erik's and Andre's, are available there. And let's see how we're doing.
All right,
Andre, we can see you.
Okay, I think I can hear you.
You can hear us?
Yay.
Yeah, but I don't know how to use this. Good, open that. Okay, we're trying to. Such a bizarre situation. Hi, sorry.
No, it's working. That looks good. That looks good.
Yeah, that looks great.
But I don't know how to use this thing. But that's okay.
You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is talk, and we know you know how to do that.
Okay, I can talk. Hello, good morning. All right.
So I've given my housekeeping. I'm just going to skip the bios because we've eaten a little bit of time here. But everyone probably knows Andre Dubus, regular festival friend who's written several books, including The House of Sand and Fog and Townie and Gone So Long, and Erik Hoel, is that right? Hoel, excuse me, Hoel. Whose debut book, The Revelations, we're here to talk about today. Thank you both, and please, Andre, take it away.
Okay, Leslie, thank you. Apologies to whomever is listening for our technical difficulties. Erik, I can't see you, but...
Oh, no.
No, now I can because you talked. Okay.
There we go. Oh, you're switching. You're on the iPad, so you're switching.
On an iPad. Okay.
You'll see me occasionally.
All right. Great. All right, so here we are. Let's tell people, Erik, let's tell them about our history a little bit.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about your book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one reason why I'm so happy to chat with you. One, I've seen you at the Newburyport Festival several times now before, so it's an honor to actually chat with you at it. And Andre and I have this strange history of like coincidences and similarities, I feel like. Actually, Andre, I recently found out since we last spoke that my father, who I've been estranged from for many years, he used to get beers with your dad.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so there's many things, but the more pertinent ones are that I grew up in the Jabberwocky, which is a local bookstore in Newburyport. I always wrote from when I was young, and Andre was actually my first writing teacher when I was just about 13 years old, and I wrote mostly about like elves and dwarves, but I think relatively okay characterization for elves and dwarves. They always had something going on, and after graduating high school, I actually went into the sciences, but I kept writing because I just grown up in a store and admired all this and admired kind of the literary scene that I had grown up in. And I ended up getting my PhD in neuroscience. And this book, The Revelations, takes place within the world of neuroscience. But I think another kind of funny thing about Andre and I is that we live down the street from one another, or at least my childhood home is now down the street from his, right? We both grew up kind of in the influence of literature, but maybe in a sense kind of outside of it in a certain way as well. Like Andre, I feel like that's your experience that I can tell from Townie, which is that you grew up, of course, with your father, who's a very influential literary figure, and that radiated down to you. But you also were raised by a single mom like myself. I grew up, my influence of literature was the Bookstore, which I was incredibly lucky to grow up in, but also kind of raised from a single mom, a bit of like a non-standard way into the literary scene, I think, for both of us. So anyways, it's always really fun to chat with you because I feel like there's this sense in which we share kind of this, it's not really an outsider perspective, that wouldn't be correct, but something about maybe the comparison is like, there's a way in to a very different world when you're growing up, and you can kind of see that way in, and at some point you have to choose to take it.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put. And I totally agree. We are the sons of strong single mothers, and we come from houses filled with books. And you also had your mom, Sue Little's beautiful Jabberwocky, and that's where our classes were. I remember she set up a little table, and was also your best friend Blaze. And no, I have to say, your elves were three-dimensional round characters, to quote Flaubert. They were. They had feelings, they had regrets, they had fears, they had desires, they had magic powers. but
less elves now in most of my fiction. Although, who knows, maybe one day.
Well, let's talk about your fiction, sir. So, for all of you listening, and thank you for being here and supporting the festival again, especially as we eke our way out of this pandemic. So I've endorsed this book, and I meant what I wrote, which is, it is one of the most remarkable novels I've ever read. I've never read a novel like it. And this is your first novel, and I feel very confident of many to come. No pressure at all, no pressure. But there's so much going on in this book. And let me just back up autobiographically again about you, Erik. I remember talking, I would always talk to Sue when in the store about you, and of course her Morgan, but she gave me updates on you. And I remember feeling a tad disappointed when I found out you were heading into neuroscience. I said, neuroscience? He's a fiction writer. What are you talking about? I said, I know he's always been very smart, but and then to know that, well, wait a minute, no. So then I read the Revelations in Galleys, and it's clear that, okay, well, we have a novelist whose day job is actually studying consciousness as a neuroscientist. And how would you, because you are in a profoundly challenging profession in the sciences, how would you describe your straddling those two worlds?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, because it can be difficult, but in other ways there are significant advantages. So, the story behind this novel is actually, it's very, very old. Like, I've been thinking about this book or something like this book for a very long time, maybe even since I was in high school or later in high school, when I kind of discovered the nonfiction section of the store and realized that, I really love all this nonfiction stuff, but my first love was fiction. And I kept thinking there has to be some way to kind of put stuff together. And I read, and then when I discovered like Umberto Eco, or Rebecca Goldstein, or even like somebody like David Mitchell, I was like, oh, wait a minute, there are people who can really stuff ideas into their fiction, and they can do it in a way that's not, kind of detracting from it, the way that's actually supporting it, like the Overstory by Richard Powers, all about trees, but also the science of trees and how people relate to it. Beautiful book. And I think he really kind of pulled it off there. And I think doing that is quite difficult. And I kind of thought, well, wait a minute, if I can get some expertise in the sciences, maybe I can have a background that would allow me to write, a fiction set in a world set in like a world of people attempting to make a scientific discovery, which is really, in a sense, what this book is about. It's about people trying to make a particular scientific discovery. And that's very hard. It's very human. That's something that's very lost. That's lost in a lot of contemporary discourse. People don't think of scientists as humans who have personal relationships and get mad and have sex and mess up and, you know, all these things. And that stuff actually goes into the science, right? I mean, in many cases, it can be motivating for it or detracting from it, right? I mean, there's no way to separate yourself. And so I actually ended up kind of attempting to do research for this book. I just ended up becoming so enthralled by neuroscience and this question of how does the brain generate a stream of consciousness, a stream of experience, the thing that you wake up with every day and that vanishes when you enter a deep dreamless sleep, right? And I ended up getting my PhD working with probably one of the world's leading neuroscientists and working in that very high pressure environment. And in a sense, I always felt, especially in the early days, I always felt a little bit like a character actor, like I was kind of method acting my way to do research for a novel, which is absolutely insane. I mean, that's not a good way to live your life, but there's a sense in which it's true. And so I ended up, I'm still in neuroscience. I'm a professor at Tufts University. I do pure scientific research, which I'm lucky enough to get paid to do, but I really consider a lot of that stuff my day job. And, and I just love to write fiction. I think I'll always hopefully write. It's really hard for me to imagine not doing that.
No, of course you will. You're a writer. Erik, I'm listening to your path and I'm thinking, well, that's interesting. He went and got a PhD in neuroscience, and I was a bartender and a house cleaner to support my writing. But I love that was your direction. I want to read one of the epigraphs to your novel, if I can, from Francis Crick, who is a Nobel Prize winning scientist, right? From his The Astonishing Hypothesis. Let us now return to our main problem. This is to locate the awareness neurons and to discover what it is that makes their firing symbolize what we see. This is like trying to solve a murder mystery. We know something about the victim, the nature of awareness, and we know various miscellaneous facts that may be related to the crime. So one of the many, many remarkable things about this novel, and we have to talk about the structure. Well, let's just talk about that now, and then I'll get to the hypothesis question. But how did you come up with this structure? We begin from the point of view of Kirk, our protagonist. We wake up, I think, 52 mornings in a row. We are waking
32.
up. 32. But
Yeah.
We're 5 weeks. And we're waking up from a dream. We're Kirk waking up, Kirk waking up, Kirk waking up.
Yeah, I got to be honest. Some of it is maybe a truculence on my part, where I kind of like to do things that are maybe considered big no-nos in traditional fiction writing, or like big, like don't go there's. So the very classic one is like waking up from a dream, right? And everyone, I think you said it at some point when we talked, right? Like it's like the big no-no. I mean, I'm sure you tell your students, like, please don't immediately start with waking up.
Well, the question, and all beginning writers begin with the character waking up. And the question is, why do we have to start with them peeing and brushing their teeth? Do we have to start here? Is it important? But you do it, and you pull it off beautifully.
Yeah, and I do it, 32 times. And okay, so why did I do that, right? It's not actually me just trying to make some point. It's actually because if you think about reflecting our own consciousness, our own stream of consciousness, I think one of the most dominant dimensions of our consciousness is kind of where we are in the day and where we are in the week. And if you think about it, the weekly structure is almost this hypnotic background oscillator to your life. Like, it is Tuesday. What do you do on Tuesdays, right? And when you wake up and you go throughout your day, right, what I wanted to do was, by following a character who you basically follow them from wake to sleep, but you do that consistently, and you kind of pull it off such that it's not too boring and the pacing is good, and so on. If you can do that, which I hopefully, a lot of effort went into pacing, so hopefully some of that came across, and you do it in a non-boring way, then what you're doing is you're putting someone into the rhythm of someone else's consciousness. And I think it allows you to just feel a little bit more like you're walking on the shoulder of this character kind of day to day, and interesting stuff is happening. And I think it just allows for a bit more empathy And honestly, another thing is just the novelty aspect. I've seen many novels that have done things, over a single day. In fact, right below the Francis Crick quote, right, there's one
James
from
Joyce.
Ulysses. Yeah, there's one from Ulysses. And, so I'd seen stuff that done across the day, but I just never seen like each day is a chapter and you just keep going. I figured out why very quickly, which is that, it's a very difficult structure to pull off. And what I basically did was write a huge number of days, like over 200,000 words of days, and then just shuffle them around a lot until and rework them and shuffle and rework and shuffle until there's kind of enough interesting stuff that happens each day that keeps you interested and keeps you going. But it's not unbelievable, right? You're never like, oh, there's the crazy things happen every day, right?
Well, let's talk about that, because one of the many compelling aspects of this novel is our main character and his quest. I mean, he's a bit of a genius. He's 27. Is he 27, 28 years old?
Feels so young to me now.
Yeah. Well, wait, young man. And and my God, he's trying to, with his fellow Crick scholars at NYU, trying to solve the mystery of human consciousness. So, and I told you this earlier, but I want to share it with whomever's listening who may identify with what I'm about to say, which is I am just not a science loving man. I am so grateful to science. I got my 2 shots. Thank you, science. I'm just grateful that there are scientists and that there is science. But I am one of those people whose eyes glaze over whenever the subject comes up. Until people show up in the story, I just don't care. and so when I began to read Your Galleys a year ago, I thought, oh man, I love Erik, but am I going to love reading about consciousness? I couldn't put it down, sir. I couldn't put it down, and no one's going to be able to put it down. And the reason I can't put it down is, well, first you write with great depth and compassion and humanity about this young man, and also you go to the point of view of his girlfriend Carmen, which I think some of the finest writing in the book is from her point of view, by the way. And it's all fine writing. But what I love about his character is he's really flawed. He's self-destructive. He's like a lot of brilliant people I know. He's got a real dark side. He's got a lot of wounds, but he's so hungry and passionate to solve this problem. And that is just so compelling on the page, Erik. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you so much. I think what people should understand about this novel, beyond like its structure or these kind of quirks, is that precisely the quote Andre read by Francis Crick. So Francis Crick was somebody who discovered DNA, realized he could do whatever he wanted with his academic career, and said, "Wait a minute, we need a scientific theory of consciousness," which we don't have. We still currently don't have one. Which is how do you map brain states to experiences? Like, what is behind the taste of coffee in the morning? We don't know, right? So we need a scientific theory, which is a really big deal if you come up with this theory, right? And so but in a book, in Francis Crick's book, he mentions that this is like trying to solve a murder mystery. And that just really started getting to me, so the actual plot of this novel is that there's a bunch of people trying to figure out consciousness, especially the main character, Kirk, who's more kind of monomaniacally driven toward it. And then one of them dies under mysterious circumstances. And the others, actually, particularly Carmen, this other scientist, she forms kind of this amateur investigation into the death, trying to figure out what actually happened. And Kirk is kind of there along for the ride. And their 2 twin mysteries kind of play off each other throughout the text. And so, even if you're just a fan of murder mysteries, this book will work for you. But I think Kirk is he represents this very romantic, very human side of science. He is very much a flawed character. He can be very arrogant because he considers himself very intelligent. He is pretty smart, but he's very much a double-edged sword. He gets in trouble for kind of not following the rules within academia. One thing that I wanted to try to get across was that a lot of times stuff at the very edge relies on people maybe not being as sane as we would like them to be. And, you know, the fact that academia, you know, science used to exist and science was in the university, but it wasn't really a big part of academia. It almost had its own rules and things. And frankly, you know, the great physicists were probably not the nicest people, right? And you know, I think with Kirk's character, what you see is his kind of romantic want to come up with a big, grand theory of consciousness and essentially be the next Einstein, because that's what would happen if you actually came up with one, runs into all sorts of problems. And some of them are problems he should run into, but others are like, hey, maybe we shouldn't stop someone who's kind of monomaniacally obsessed with solving something. Maybe we should give them a bit of room. And I needed that romanticism because science can be almost corrosive. Like science, once you start talking about science, as you said, right? We believe science, right? Science is like this big capital S, and it's almost like this big entity that enters the room with a t-shirt that says capital T truth on it. And it just kind of sucks the oxygen out of everything in the room. And so by making the characters really like, and by making the characters really like romantic and poetic and driven and maybe a bit kind of unreal, like all the characters there's almost a magical realism going on with their personalities, that they're a bit kind of very big on the page. That combats the science, because there is a lot of science in the book. I mean, this is a book set in the world of science, the world of research, the world of how people actually figured this stuff out.
Erik, let's give people a taste of this book. Can you read us a short passage or two?
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to read something, which is, this is after, actually, you know, one thing that begins to occur in the novel are kind of these strange events. And they become more strange, maybe kind of the closer the characters get towards maybe some answers around the mystery of consciousness, why it is that the brain generates this stream of experience at all. And so here's a scene of Kirk, who actually, this is soon after he's arrived at the program, and he's just so thrilled to be kind of back accepted within the world of science that he goes to visit this building, which is called the CNS, or Center for Neuroscience, or Central Nervous System. He goes to visit it in the dark, and he goes down to the monkey labs, and he experiences a very strange phenomenon. The building stands as a dark windowless tower, which he approaches in the night. By the way, they're in New York, which is relevant. A single light is on from somewhere far above. The ID card he'd been given makes the door flash green, and he enters the cool artificial air with the smile of one entering a sanctum. He wants to see again the familiar sights of the graduate student making a midnight dinner, the postdoc mid-experiment listening to music, the long rows of waiting workstations, the nocturnal mice now up to play while the scientists sleep. But in the dim lobby, everything is silent, and his fingers linger on the handle, the glass, the empty lobby desk. Where is the guard? Kirk had thought entry to the building was constantly monitored, even this late. He goes to drink at the water fountain, but bending down, the water never touches his mouth, for the metal under his hand is vibrating subtly but forcefully. He puts his palm on the cold tile of the wall. There it is, stronger, almost a hum, and he can feel it moving through his entire arm now. Moving a few steps, hand still on the wall, he finds it increasing in intensity. There's some sort of incredibly loud droning vibrating through the entire building's foundation. Maybe there's construction in the basement? Following the hum through the dark corridors, he passes no sign of anyone else on his way to the stairwell. As he descends, the metal railing shudders perceptibly under his hand. At the very bottom, he finds himself back to the door to the primate labs, the annex of which is illuminated only by red light. The hum is no longer just a hum, but has become an alien sound vibrating through his skeleton like an ocean of white noise. The locus is beyond the annex. Above it, he can now hear what sounds like a jungle of screams and cries, howling, shrieks, the clatter of cages as the monkeys inside go mad. Fighting the urge to clamp his hands to his ears in the dim red light, Kirk gropes wildly for the light switches beside the glass door. On finding it, the main primate room beyond blinks into medical brightness. And at the same time, it is as if all the sound in the world shuts off. The overpowering sound is gone. The vibration is gone. Everything is still. His heartbeat is now the only sound. Kirk walks cautiously into the long room. In the stacked cages on either side, the monkeys all stare at him. As he moves forward, they track him, silent and totem-like. Around him, the various stations of scientific equipment have been trashed. Something is so wrong, but he keeps moving like it's a dream to the other end, past the broken glass, the shattered slides, the twisted monitoring equipment, the lab chairs that seem violently torn apart by some immense and impossible strength. It is as if a great force has destroyed everything. The normal musk of the animal room is present, but also something sickly sweet, like rotten flowers. At the end of the area is the closed door to the cage cleaning room, its glass portal pitch black. The lights are still off inside. In the eerie silence, he hears movement, as if some great bulk is shifting inside the darkness. There's some kind of grunt or exhalation, but in a monstrous register, and then a low, drawn-out hiss that ends abruptly, following by a slithering of something being withdrawn. Then there is a clanging so loud it makes Kirk startle. A distant sound recedes. Slowly, extremely slowly, he reaches out to flip the light switch outside the door. With a click, he finds himself staring through the portal into the bright cage cleaning room, which has only rubber hoses and overturned empty cages on the floor, bare walls on all sides. In the center, with the floor sloping toward it, a gigantic metal drain glistens and drips.
So glad you go ahead, Erik.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, so there's almost some Lovecraftian horror that occurs in the novel. You get hints that something very strange is going on.
But listen, you just gave me an insight reading that passage again, and I've read your book almost 3 times with delight. So this murder mystery. Are you saying that the idea of a murder mystery actually came through the quote by Crick?
I think it might have, because I did read The Astonishing Hypothesis very early on, but I forget if I forget if I had the idea for the murder mystery first. What happened was that I visited New York when I was 19. I got what's called a summer research internship, and I worked at the Center for Neuroscience at New York University for 1 summer in New York, and I worked in the primate labs there. And to be honest, the primate labs were too intense for me. I can't do animal research on primates. I don't feel right doing it. They're very intense places. And I wanted to bring a lot of that, the intensity of animal research, because there is some of that in the book. And I wanted to bring that into the book, but also all my experiences about New York and, so it all kind of came together then.
Manhattan is so alive in this book. It is such a big part of this book, the setting. The passage you just read, Erik, and this is the insight that I just got after having read this many times, is, so we begin with Kirk waking up from dreams. And often you've got him dreaming and then waking up from the dream. And then he goes about his Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it is, as this Crick scholar. But what you just read, after a while, your mind, especially the first time reading the novel, and it's going to be a joy for anyone who's listening who picks up the book like today, is you begin to feel that you begin to question your own consciousness, even in the day hours of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Everything's so weird in your waking hours, you begin to wonder, well, which is my life then? The one that I have when I'm dreaming, asleep in my bed? Because it seems as if my day life is just as bizarre and weird and non-sequential and bizarre. And so in many ways, the form of the novel seems to capture consciousness itself, or the mystery of it. Was this
perfect?
Was this on purpose?
So here's the thing about consciousness, right? Which is that not only just our own consciousness, but people trying to discover a scientific theory. There's all sorts of ideas about exactly how the brain does this. And it's very much not clear. And there's all sorts of kind of options. And what I wanted to do was create a book that was both like hopefully readable and interesting, but at the same time allowed you to have different perspectives about what's going on, because there are various dream sequences described in the book. And, you know, in my language, I'm trying to make even real life seem as dreamlike as possible. And so then occasionally it becomes unclear where you're like, it's almost like you're being trained to lucid dream from the novel, where you're kind of like, wait a minute, are this actually happening? The characters are actually doing this and there's this crazy thing, or is this like another dream? And so I'm incredibly happy that that came across. And that was just, again, just a lot of work and thinking about pacing and what people are thinking at various points and kind of how much they're buying what events are going on. Yeah, so that's just thrilling to hear, of course.
Let's talk about the writing process. By the way, Leslie, are we doing Q&A today? I'm hoping people have a chance to tune in. I mean, to chime in or not. I don't remember. Do you know if we are, Erik?
Absolutely. There are a couple questions in the Q&A box that I can ask, or you all can look at.
I want to make sure we have enough time. So we have until when?
So I'm going to end us at 10:50 because unfortunately I have another event at 11, and these are so
okay.
But 10:50.
Let's bring in a few questions. I have 100, but I want to bring in a few. Leslie, why don't you bring them in?
Sure, I can do them. So Erik, Pamela asks, she has a comment, not a question. Maybe it's time to publish your original stories about elves for children today.
That's a good idea, but even at 13, I think they were a bit violent. There were a lot of elves, and they were like well-armed elves.
Let me tell you, these were NC-17 elves.
Okay.
Well, maybe not. Maybe R-rated elves.
R-rated, right? But Scott asks if you keep journals of your day-to-day work life.
You know, I've tried journaling before. It doesn't always work for me. I mean, one reason why I write fiction is to, you know, the revelations involves, like I said, like a lot of stuff from my life. So, you know, the way that the monkeys are described and what primate research is actually like, and kind of like the darkness of scientific research. And I'm not saying I'm not actually against animal research, but I think it's a falsehood to claim that it's not really weird to go to work and kill like a dozen mice in a row by gassing them, which is what you do when you're an experimental scientist. And that is dark. I mean, it might be completely justified. Maybe you're trying to cure cancer, in which case do it, right? But it's to pretend that it's this anodyne thing. It's not. It's a really intense thing. Like science is like intense. And, you know, the inspiration that I had, you know, was always, for me, my favorite author is Herman Melville, you know, and Moby Dick. And I know that that's a ridiculous comparison, but I love the work scenes in Moby Dick. I love, like, wait, how do you skin a being that is 100 feet long? That is insane. And it's dark. It's dark, but it's really interesting. And I wanted to capture some of that with science. Like, how do you actually do this? Oh, you open the monkey's brain and you install like a see-through window, and then you like lower a telescope deep down. And that's dark, but it's really interesting and it's really thematic. And I think it's an appropriate subject for literature.
Amen.
Fran asks how your fiction writing is viewed at Tufts in your department.
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a great question.
Is the word. I would say, Fran.
So they look at it, it's your little quibbling hobby. They might get in the way of your real work.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Scientist.
Well, it's much more so. I think the like department staff. Like,
but you know, I've seen that. I've been in academia for years, and I do see there is departmental pressure on scholars to stay in your lane and do your work, and it's never as simple as that. And you know, well, they're just gonna have to get used to you, Erik.
Yeah. Let's see, there's a couple others.
Yeah, Debbie Zabo, a Newburyport teacher, Thank you for this question, Debbie. What was the most difficult part of writing a first novel, and what was the most fun part?
The most difficult part is definitely the publication process, by far.
The question is, you probably saw about, the publishing path.
Yeah. So the other question was, how did this book actually end up getting published? And getting something published, when luckily I received a couple of awards for my writing, and I lived in New York, and I received awards independent of any of my science. So I won the 2017 New York City Emerging Writers, which has a very good history, and I would say about 30% of the people who enter that program publish a book. And it's judged meritocratically via blind submissions. So I got in to that, and that was huge. I honestly don't think I would have been published if I didn't live in New York. And so I met my agent at a party, at a New York City party. And, and I don't think that it's fair that the industry works this way, but that's how the industry works. The most fun part of writing the novel was definitely, and I think Andre can attest to this, sometimes you get a perfect scene and you sit down and it just comes out from beginning to end, and it feels, and sometimes it's not even that good, but at the time you feel like you really wrote something that is completely cohesive, and it's like this chunk. And that feeling of, and you can't even write fast enough when you're doing that, right? Like you can't even, I write by hand a lot of the time. And so I'm just like going crazy in some coffee shop trying to get it all down, and like,
you feel like you're just receiving it. You're receiving it from another realm.
Yeah. And that's what it feels like. It feels like you're not, that's perfect. Yeah. Honestly, it feels like you're channeling something, and it's better than you. That's the best part of writing. You're like, oh, this is better than me.
And it happens once every 19 months.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's one by Christian Jacobs. Your novel reminds me of Kurt Vonnegut Player Piano crossed with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I kind of like that.
That's wonderful.
I like that mashup. Perfect. Okay, well, if other people have any questions, feel free to shoot them into the Q&A.
Let's talk about process for just a moment, if we have a moment. You and I have talked about this in an earlier conversation, but I quote my friend Richard Bausch, the wonderful fiction writer, who said that if you think that you're thinking when you're writing, think again. You're much closer to the dreaming side of your mind. So dream it through. But then he said, once you've dreamed it through, and that could be a 300-page, 3-year draft, right, of a novel, he said, then try to be terribly smart about what you've dreamed and look at it the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. And that's in my head because that's how I tend to do it. But you do it differently, right? I mean, you dream and you think. Sometimes you think and you dream. You seem to be looking at the X-ray as you go. How would you describe your process?
Yeah, I'm definitely a top-down writer. So I'm a heavy-handed writer. So like thematically, language-wise, and you know what? I love heavy-handed writers. Like I want to be slapped in the face by Melville's prose, right? I just want to be like, boom, like gonna talk to you about whaling, right? And like, or like, boom, like the whale represents man's search for meaning, right? Like I like that stuff. And that's exactly how I write. And so I do always have that sort of analytic side. It's like, so for example, someone we haven't talked a lot about, the character Carmen, who's really in a sense the main driving force of the novel, because she's the one investigating the murder. She's probably the best scientist of the group. I mean, in that she's very logical, she's skeptical, and so on. So
she's the catalyst. She's the catalyst for most of the action.
Yeah, and she's definitely the one who's like actually acting, right? Like Kirk actually doesn't do very much. He kind of just follows her around. And so how did her character come about? Well, I just had this image of this woman saying, I don't want to have a mind-body problem, which is how the problem of consciousness is traditionally referred to. I don't want to have a mind-body problem. I want to solve the mind-body problem. And that like dialogue, I just loved it. I loved it thematically. I thought it was really interesting. And so I began to think about, how am I going to build a character around that? And what I what I realized was like, well, what's the opposite of scientific research into consciousness, which is trying to figure out the intrinsic perspective on the world, right? And the opposite of that is, in a sense, the complete world of appearances, because the world of appearances is what physics is what mechanism is. The world of consciousness are the experiences behind the world of appearances. But what's the world of appearances like in career? Well, it's modeling, right? It's like being a professional model, right? And so I talked to professional models in New York, and I started doing research. And the background of this character is that her mom, she's kind of born almost freakish in the way that she looks, in the sense that she's so kind of beautiful and attractive, even as a child, that everyone's like, oh, she's going to be a model, she's going to be a movie star, she's going to be whatever. And her mom pushes her into it. And she eventually decides that this like world of appearances isn't really for her. And she ends up going into the sciences to literally try to find out the world that's behind the world of appearances. And that's a heavy-handed character, right? Like, I mean, there's no doubt about it. But
it works.
That's how I write, and I enjoy it.
But Erik, it works. You're totally correct. It is so heavy-handed, and you would think on the nose, but no, it feels so organic. Carmen's one of my favorite characters. She feels so alive, so real. I bought every bit of it. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and that involves both. Like, you both have to dream what it is like to be this person. You kind of have to have the analytic side. And like I said, I also did, like, I don't know anything about the fashion world. So then I there's models who are thanked in the back of the book, because there were people reading the draft and being like, well, this is realistic. This isn't realistic. You need to change this, right? This would never actually happen, but this would, right? And so, to me, I do enjoy that aspect of writing novels, because it does feel a little bit like scientific research, where you're like, okay, well, can I kind of sell this? Can I get enough of the little details right that no one's going to be like, no one's going to be in the industry or know anything about it and be like, oh my God, no.
And the thing about and I know we have to wrap up soon, but what I love about the artistic pursuits and scientific pursuits is they are both, and Einstein talked about this and Faulkner talked about this, but they're both fueled by authentic curiosity, simple curiosity. Einstein's question, why does the chicken cheep? Right? He really meant, why does that little chicklet make that cheep sound? He wasn't being cute. He wanted to know what happened, right? Faulkner said and that is his most famous quote about the process, that the thing he thought that the young writer needed more than anything was curiosity. And so it makes total sense. So you've got a lot of your process, Erik's. There's a cerebral sort of analytical thinking about theme, but then you totally let go and free fall into your curiosity. And I think that's why these characters are so real and alive. And I mean, this book is deep in me, man. It's going to be deep in a lot of people.
Thank you so much, Andre. That's amazing.
Yeah.
While we're on the subject, we've got 2 minutes left. I'll address this question by Tom Himmel, which is that he's an admirer of Richard Powers, some of whose novels have a strong science component, Goldbug Variations, Overstory. Does his combining of science and fiction work for you? And was it in any way an influence? And so, yes, I love Richard Powers. There's some really cruel quote from him by, I think, maybe James Wood, that's like, he's like a satyr, which is that his top half is like super buff and that's his brain, and then like his heart is like the legs and they're kind of like spindly. And I think it's a really cruel quote, but there's a bit of truth to it. I think that Powers is an amazing writer, but sometimes, if I had to say what a big difference between him and I is that, in a sense, I think that he fetishizes science. And I say that as a scientist, I say that as someone who loves science, but I think that Richard Powers loves science and wants to write about science, and he's kind of on it, and the scientists are generally the better characters than the people who are in the humanities in his work. And it's not that that's necessarily bad, but to me, what I wanted to do was just, I think my actual background in science kind of allowed me to like take off the kid's glove and like be like, here's what animal research actually looks like. Here's how scientists debate their own theories. And guess what? It involves a lot of ego, right? Like, it involves a lot of ego. So I think that while I love Richard Powers, I would say he and I are different in some way. I realize I've only named advantages on my end. There are advantages that Richard Powers has.
But I agree with your assessment, Erik, of how you paint science in the Revelations. There's a lot of drinking going on too.
Yeah, yeah, and
Young
that's
scientists. Yeah.
yeah, and these are, like young scientists in a new city. I mean, one thing that happens is that when all the characters, actually this Crick scholarship has like 8 people in it, and they all converge on New York. And when a bunch of people come to a new program, you'll notice that the dynamics about like who's going to be in the in crowd and so on become very primate-esque. And then they're all like going down to like toward the primate lab, while clearly like establishing their own like dominance hierarchy, within themselves. So yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that.
Well, I
It's
wish we
wonderful.
could keep chatting, but unfortunately we're out of time. I appreciate you both joining us. Congratulations on your first novel, Erik.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And Andre, thank you so much.
And Andre, thank you so much. And
Pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
I can't hope more that we're in person next year and we'll see your handsome faces in Newburyport.
And party at my house.
22. Oh my God, I missed the party so much last night. I was like, I worked all day. Where's my beer?
I know.
All right. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Congratulations, Erik. Fantastic. Leslie, thank you.
And we'll see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you.